World Refugee Day 2022. We have two guests in the studio. One is a regular of the show, Justin Kusuania. Jamin. Hey, why am I saying Justin? Where did I get that from? Jamin Kusuania is the Build Advocacy Manager, International Rescue Committee. Hey, good morning, Jamin.
Good morning, Latif.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Naomba radhi, uniwie radhi kwa kukuita jina la mtu mwingine. Huyo mtu mimi simjui ni nani.
Don't look at me. I also don't know that person.
You don't know?
Justin.
No.
You don't know who Justin
I don't
is?
know who Justin. I don't even have a relative who's called Justin.
Okay.
Yes.
It is Jamin.
Yes.
And Jamin today is joined by Irene Kinoti, who's a programs officer at Pamoja Trust. Irene, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
I'm glad to be here.
This is that is the hot seat.
Can already feel it.
Because
Wow.
you see, Jamin is a regular. He already knows how to evade the fire. So the bullies in us are just going to focus on you today, unfortunately. But then we will start by just getting to understand World Refugee Day, Jamin.
Yes.
The background, the history, the importance of it.
So the World Refugee Day is celebrated every 20th day of June since the year 2001. And so this year is 21 years since we began marking World Refugee Day. In 2001, the commemoration was certainly in commemorating 50 years since our refugee convention, the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees, actually came into place. And so this has then happened every single year on the 20th day of June. The day, World Refugee Day, is about looking at the resilience of refugees all across the world and also raising awareness in terms of the plight of refugees and the need for stakeholders, governments, to be able to ensure a conducive environment for refugees, but also to be able to respond to those particular push factors that cause displacement and therefore refugee situations all across the world. Yes.
So how are we marking this today in Kenya?
So in Kenya, we have many events that are actually happening at the community level and even at the national level. We have a national event that is happening at the Kakuma refugee camp. We have a national event that is happening at the Kenyatta University School of Law, where we're having a public discourse on refugee issues and also exhibitions of their work, but also community activities like one that we are organizing at the community level, which are actually sports activities to be able to bring people together and ensure that we have social cohesion. Those are just part of the activities that are happening. I know even today in the evening, there is also a discussion about refugees and the opening the space with the Editors Guild that is happening at the Sarova Stanley from 5:30 p.m.
Irene, we have dealt with your colleague from Pamoja Trust a number of times, and we know that you deal a lot at community level, engaging with people in the community. So what activities are you participating in today as Pamoja Trust to mark World Refugee Day?
Okay, so our events have been started from the last week, which were mostly preparatory events at the community levels in mostly the regions such as Kayole, Kangemi, Kawangware, Githurai, Kasarani, the areas that we find we have a lot of urban refugees located in Nairobi. And the sessions have been basically holding community awareness, the general community awareness sessions on refugee rights, sensitizing the communities about who are refugees, what is the importance of recognizing their place in the society, how can we protect them, how can we be able to establish their needs and respond to them. And moving on to today, we are planning an event at Kayole, where we're going to have communities from Kayole and the other regions converging together with the different departments from the county government. We have invites from UNHCR just to continue with the awareness sessions, and after the awareness sessions have an integration or an open session to have a a sports event where we're going to play against each other, have fun, and see how we can enable refugees have a lot of recognition at the community level. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we're looking at a situation in Kenya. I think we will look at the last statistics. I believe Kenya globally is one of the countries that takes in the highest number of refugees for whatever circumstance, right? Whether we're looking at refugees as a result of war, refugees as a result of economic devastation, whatever the case may be, Kenya's up there, right? So, like, as we celebrate World Refugee Day today, what is the footprint of the refugees that have come into the country? Why are they here? And I ask that question in the manner that I do to understand the reasons as to why they're refugees. Because you obviously there are different clusters, there are different classifications of refugees. So what are the different reasons that we are seeing for refugees being in Kenya today?
So the truth of it is that globally, Kenya is not top 10 in terms of the number of refugees that we host. And because the number of registered refugees that we have in Kenya is about 540,000. Globally, we are not top 10 of those particular numbers. In the region, yes, we are number 3 because Uganda hosts the largest number of refugees, approximately about 1.6 million. Then we have Ethiopia hosting about 800,000. Then Kenya hosting about 539,000. But yes, to answer this question, is that 72% of refugees all across the globe, they reside within the neighboring countries where they suddenly come from. And so this region has had issues in terms of war and conflict, and therefore Kenya has happened to be a safe haven to some of those particular populations. And so people who have come into this particular country as refugees, most of them have actually been displaced by war, by war in Somalia, war in South Sudan, war and conflict in Ethiopia. And so in terms of the populations of the number of refugees that we find within the country, those particular countries take the lion's share of the refugees that we find in the country. Congo, South Sudan, Somalia, we have a huge number of refugees coming from those areas. And the main concern is because of the war and conflict arising from those particular countries.
With the camps that we had, that Kenya had of Kakuma, Dadaab, in terms of size, what are we looking at? Some of the two of, or comparable to these other countries that you've mentioned, Uganda and Ethiopia. What is different about these two camps? Because the truth of the matter is that when you hear refugees speak around the world, you did hear Kakuma and Dadaab. You did not hear about the camps in Uganda or Ethiopia.
True. And I think that's a good observation, because out there you have heard that Dadaab is one of the biggest refugee camps in the world. The management of refugees within countries is different. In Uganda, for instance, they live within settlements, and there are several settlements in Uganda. In Kenya, we have only 2 camps. So meaning, once you have a population of 539,000 people, so one camp is taking 220, the other one 220. So those are actually big. But then when you go to Uganda, where they have many refugees than us, but they have very many settlements where you would find 30,000, 50,000, or even 100,000, then you don't see that particular figure as having large number of refugees per se. But then it's the way we have managed refugees, and we have only gazetted 2 refugee camps, the Dadaab and the Kakuma. So when we confine this particular population, then we get to have a big size.
So are you synonymously using the word settlement and camp to mean the same thing?
No. Okay, let me rephrase it. The refugee camp, as we have done it in Kenya, is that in terms of service access, they would access services and support within those particular areas. In terms of settlements, is that refugees and host communities coexist within the same areas.
So it's like an estate.
Yes. But then, that's why we call it a settlement. We have attempted to do the same in Kenya, what we call the Kalobei settlement, which is about 6-7 kilometers from Kakuma, where then the refugees and host communities coexist together. So what you would find then in other particular countries where we have settlements is that in a county, let me give you an example, in a county like in Marsabit, then you will have very many areas where refugees reside, not only one particular point. And so because of that, you will find that we have many settlements with few people than in Kenya, where you will find we have only 2 camps with a bigger population residing in those particular areas.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to stick on this because then it is directly linked to this whole, looking at the celebration today and the different areas whereby, I mean, I'm assuming those areas were picked for today's celebrations because that's where you also find a high number of. Is it possible that you do have people who've come here seeking asylum, for example, who've come here refugee status, but then have just become almost, you know, members of the community? Because there's certain parts of Nairobi that you will go to, for example, and you will find high numbers of people from different countries that may have, number one, come here because of war, but then, you know, have just kind of settled and grown. Are we looking at the same thing whereby you have those settled communities that may have come from refugee status? Or are we saying no, that these are certain areas where they tend to kind of drift to when they come into the country as refugees?
So I think when you say that they have already been settled, it might be true. There might be some truths about that, because as we engage our communities on day-to-day basis, we notice that there are certain trends. For example, you'll find that once a refugee comes into Kenya and moves specifically to the Kasarani region, and he's from maybe Congo nationality, their relatives or people from Congo come to know that we have our relative living in Kasarani, you'll find that majority of the Congolese will be drawn to Kasarani. So the aspect of settlements already being in existence, but not in a way that is specifically structured, could have already been there and has been there for a long period of time. And I think that's why we want to show the communities that these people are here, they've been existing in these areas for a long period of time, and it's time for them to get recognized. Yeah.
Jamin, the last time you were here, you talked to us about what the end goal would be. And I think we had this conversation just around refugees. So there was the intent to eventually settle. There was also the aspect of repatriation or there was one other, resettlement. So what is the aim now? Or are you saying, like for Kenya, for example, is Kenya ready for these refugees that are here? And truth be told, keep coming, because we still have, there's this regional conflict that still is active. So then what is the intention? Is it still those 3 that you say, look, there's groups of people that we say, look, can they be repatriated? Can they be settled here? Or can they be resettled somewhere else? What's the goal?
The goal is to find durable solutions for the refugee menace. And Kenya and other countries join together in what we call the Global Compact on Refugees. That is certainly acknowledges that for the refugee situation, there certainly need to be international cooperation if these particular situations are going to be dealt with. And the Global Compact for Refugees that came into effect in 2018 looks at 4 things. One is to ease pressure on host countries like Kenya that are actually hosting refugees, promote self-reliance for refugees so that they can be able to depend on themselves. Because the truth of it is that donor support over the years has declined, and therefore a need to be able to support refugees to be able to provide for their own families and support their children. Partly because it's also dignity that people can be able to support themselves other than getting handouts. But the other aspect is opening more quotas for placement in third countries. And that is the resettlement aspect that we certainly have. And the fourth objective of the Global Compact is actually ensuring that we support safe return of refugees to their countries of origin. And so that remains to be the plan in terms of the end goal. We acknowledge, as you say, that we have had cyclic aspects of refugees, but then what are we doing within the countries where they come from? What are we doing to assist the countries that are hosting them? What are we doing to be able to give them skills and so that they can actually be self-reliant on themselves, and even opening the resettlement quotas to go to the other countries. So that is the goal.
In this country, as you mentioned,
Yes.
Yes, we are host to predominantly people from other countries. What about our own people? People who are indigenous to this country, citizens of this country, but because, again, of difficulties, have moved from where they were previously. Are they accounted for in this discussion?
Who have moved out of the country?
Like IDPs.
IDPs, yes, because those are refugees.
Or
don't they qualify to be
Or do
refugees?
they become refugees when they land on the shores of another country?
Actually, that's a good observation. The number of IDPs the world over is actually more than the number of refugees. We have close to 56 million internally displaced persons across the world. And though we would not categorize IDPs as refugees, because then one who would qualify to be a refugee once they have crossed their border to seek asylum in another particular country, you will find that the reasons that will cause displacement for both IDPs and refugees will actually be similar issues. The difference is that part of these popular populations have moved across the borders, others have not moved across the borders. And so within the borders, then the countries remain to have the responsibility of making sure that they care for the people within their borders. The slight advantage that IDPs have over refugees is always that systems within countries may not be accommodative to refugees. And I'll give an example. That a refugee who crosses to come into Kenya will realize that then their documentation has not been factored within the entire system of countries and access to services, which will be different from what you will find from an IDP. You will find that these refugees are not included within financial inclusion, which is different what you will find within IDPs. But then the truth of the matter, situations that force them to move are actually similar, only that one has moved across the border and others are within the boundaries of the countries. And even in terms of what then becomes the solution for these two categories of people, it's different. Though one, we are pursuing people to go back to their countries of origin. In these others, we're asking ourselves, what has been the cause? So how then can we be able to correct the issues and the situations that happen, whether it is war, whether it is floods, as it has happened many times, that cause internally displaced persons.
There's something that you mentioned, Irene, on which is how you're working with the communities to treat the refugees that are living amongst them. Take the example of one of the areas that you've mentioned, Kayole. So how many refugees are we talking about who live in Kayole? And are they properly and fully integrated into the community, or do they live separately and do they have access to services separately? What is the integration plan and process?
Okay, so I can't really tell the specific number of refugees that are within the specific regions that we have. However, in terms of integration, we can see that there is a culture of already an existing integration amongst the community and the refugees themselves. For instance, when we talk about the issue about sharing facilities and the public amenities, everything that we may need as a human being, you'll find that the refugees get the acceptance and they access these services. However, you'll find that we have some of the challenges that come with the prejudice we have in our communities. And maybe I can give a case example of an area like Kasarani, where we had a community where they were trying to access a specific hospital. However, in terms of getting the maternity services, they were being excluded, specifically the Congo community, because the hospital felt that the Congolese are giving birth too much. And you actually see whatever the intervention that has been there is the chiefs have been trying to speak to the hospital and telling them that these are people who are part of the community.
Public hospital or private?
It's a public hospital. But you see, the prejudice already exists among our people, and that's why the place of creating awareness.
So it's not the institution; it's actually the people working in this facility who are looking and thinking, "Mumejaza wards."
Yeah.
The issue here seems to be not Umejaza ward, but you are taking up space.
That our people.
Yes, and is that really the case? Are they taking up space?
I think
What informs these prejudices?
Yes.
I think we have not planned for refugees in our access to services in this country before. We have a new Refugee Act of last year that begins giving us directions in terms of including refugees within the county integrated development plans and that. And so part of this particular prejudice is persons thinking that, we didn't plan for you. And so you are depleting our resources faster than we could have done. Yeah. And so the best thing to do, and now that the legal framework is giving directions of that sort, is that then we include the populations and the number of refugees when we are actually having our county development plans and even our annual development plans. In that way, then it's possible then to factor their population and their needs within that particular aspect of budgeting. And so access to public services does not feel like these people are depleting these particular resources that we do not budget for them by the end of the day. But as Irene says, the communities continue to exist and live amongst each other, trade amongst each other and do businesses in those particular locations. And so we have a seamless aspect of integration. And all the efforts that we do is actually to be able to reinstate that aspect of social coexistence and social coexistence within the communities where the refugees are residing, so that then we don't have conflicts that arise because of competition for resources and those kind of issues.
Yeah. Let's continue the conversation after the break. This is the Situation Room live on SpiceFM and online on YouTube and Facebook. Jamin Kusuania is a Rebuild Advocacy Manager at International Rescue Committee, and Irene Kinoti is a Program Officer at Pamoja Trust. Today is World Refugee Day. We are talking about addressing the plight of refugees who are within the country. And
this is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Jamin Kusuania, he's a Rebuild Advocacy Manager at International Rescue Committee, and Irene Kinoti, Program Officer at Pamoja Trust.
Right, so World Refugee Day is being celebrated around the world, right?
Yes.
And a couple of weeks ago, there was the issue of, those who had sought asylum in the UK. And at some point, UK government said, you know what, it's time for you people to leave because of 1, 2, 3. Rwanda said, all right, let's see a situation where we can receive these folks and see what we can do. The interesting thing was that the very robust and vibrant community that is the British people then brought it to Parliament and said, no, we have a responsibility to take care of these people. So while that whole conversation is happening, deliberated on, the people who should have gone to Rwanda still remain in the UK. What happens in a situation like this, whereby you have a would-be host country wanting to take some people, another country says, you shouldn't be here, you must leave, but the people are saying, no, we want to be able to host them and take care of them.
The responsibility of managing refugees is actually a responsibility of governments. Governments can be able to pursue other third country options to be able to ease the pressure that they have in terms of hosting refugees within their borders. But then even when that happens, then it has to have a voluntary nature of the persons that then are going to be moving from one particular country to another. And that's why we always keep on talking about resettlement, where people, for instance, refugees will leave Kenya and they'll go to Germany, Australia, and they'll be resettled there. But then the situation that we have in UK and in Rwanda is that then the UK has a feeling that these are actually illegal immigrants who are actually coming to a country. And so they have an arrangement with Rwanda that we can offload this particular category of people to your country, then you can determine whether they qualify for asylum.
So you process them for us.
Yes, essentially, actually, that's
Becomes
what
a processing house.
Yes, okay. what they are saying, and so they were going to offer, I think, 120 million pounds to Rwanda for agreeing to have this. And what the UK is simply saying, they want to show illegal immigrants that you have no chance of coming to this particular point. And the argument is they needed to have gone to seek asylum in France
before crossing
the border if they were actually genuine asylum seekers. But the truth of the matter is that people would flee to where they feel they are safe. And so if they do not feel they are safe in France, then they'll have that particular right to move into the UK. I know the British people made noise about this. The British courts actually allowed the process to go. But then just before departure, the European Court of Human Rights issued an injunction. And so they have not moved to Rwanda. And I think we wait to see what the verdict of the court will be by the end of the day. But the aspect of voluntary aspect of persons who would want to move to other third countries need to be re-emphasized.
This is not a conversation that's even unique just to the UK. Israel has had the same conversation with Rwanda, incidentally. People who are seeking to get into Australia are processed on some island before you are allowed onto mainland Australia, Papua New Guinea, Nauru, and those other islands. Just processing houses.
Yes.
How do we internationally define a refugee, and how do we distinguish a refugee from an immigrant and then an illegal immigrant?
And what rights does a refugee have? And what rights do
immigrants,
yes, illegal or otherwise, have?
A good question. For one to be a refugee, you must qualify. And many times I've emphasized on this. And the reason is that the paths that refugees use are also paths that other different immigrants actually use. And so it's good that you ask the question, because it's important then to distinguish these all categories of migrants that we certainly have. The 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees then sets that kind of qualification. That you must be out of your country of origin or nationality because of fear of being persecuted based on your race, religion, nationality, belonging to a particular social or political group. And our 1969 OAU Convention on Refugees expands that to say, or matters disturbing public order or foreign domination. And so what countries will then be doing is that once you notify your intention to seek asylum, they will conduct interview to see that you merit based on that particular criteria. And so if you merit, then you become an asylum seeker, then you become a refugee, you have been processed to be so. If you do not merit, then that particular process, and you had already notified your intention to seek asylum, then you go back to your home area. Many of the other immigrants that we have are actually persons looking for green pastures. So they have, under that particular criteria, they do not fit. But yes, they are crossing over because they know they can be able to get work and opportunities on a particular, that other side of the country. So it's simply looking for green pastures. And so there's always a need to ask those particular questions, to interrogate people when they notify their intention to seek asylum. Why exactly are they coming? Many of these other immigrants, even they don't notify their intention, so they will come, live in Kenya, try to
find a way out,
to work around, because they know that they would not qualify in that serious scrutiny. Because, for instance, in Kenya, if you come from Congo and say you are seeking asylum, the process of interrogation includes doing a background check on those particular villages that you came from. Because it is not the entire country in Congo where actually we have conflict.
Sure.
And so you could come from Congo and you do not qualify, but someone else comes from Congo and they certainly qualify. CT asked about what are the rights of refugees
and immigrants, illegal or otherwise.
and illegal immigrants. The truth of it is that immigrants have no rights. Why? Immigrants are actually persons who violate the citizenship and immigration laws of a particular country. That's simply what they are. Because they are illegal people who have taken advantage or have tried to break the rules of immigration that says for you to come into the country, you must have a visa, you must have a purpose, and all that. Or they have come into the country, their visa have expired and they don't want to go back home. And so because they are already violating the law, then they would have no express rights per se. We will just administer the right to life that are actually universal for every particular person, irrespective of who they certainly are. For refugees, there is a recognition that persons flee because their life is in danger. There is this famous statement that they say that no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. And so, as and when then they find themselves in the country, the 1951 Convention speaks about the rights that they need, the right to health, the right to access basic services, the right to education, and even respective legislations of countries also expound on that. The most recently, our Refugee Act of 2021 also expounds on that in terms of right for them to work, and even the responsibility of them to be able to pay taxes and contribute to the nation building of the states where they find themselves in. And so it's an element of states then putting the systems in place so that then these particular persons can access services. These particular persons can also be enabled to pay taxes within the countries where they come from.
So which brings me now to the context of what you talked about earlier, Irene, which is with regards to foreigners living within the communities. Let's first of all define them as foreigners, okay? Now, from that, they are either refugees or immigrants or illegal immigrants. Now, as Pamoja Trust, as you work with the communities and you're dealing with, looking at the plight of the rights of all members of a particular community, are you able to determine and know this particular area has very many illegal immigrants? This one has people who are recognized as refugees, and then knowing how to advocate their rights.
Yes, as an organization, we can't certainly tell whether this area has a lot of immigrants or not, because we don't have access to their documentations once we start engaging with them. However, our place is now sensitizing the community, sensitizing even these refugees about the issues about their documentations. For instance, we have the Refugee Act 2021. We are producing the popular versions and disseminating them amongst the refugee leaders so that they can take them to their members of their different regions, the different nationalities that they come from. And yes, at times this is a challenge for us, because as we continue engaging with the communities, the refugees, let me be specific and speak about the refugees. As we continue engaging the refugees, we'll find that majority of those who have even issues with documentations will approach Pamoja Trust and ask us to give them assistance in one way or the other. And this is the place where our work with IRC comes in, and also our interaction with the Department of Refugee Services to assist those who have pending issues with the documentations to get the assistance that they have. And even as we engage our communities, we've noticed that the chiefs, the local administrators are getting these cases a lot of times, and they have challenges in actually knowing how am I supposed to assist a certain refugee who has come to me because maybe their asylum seeker pass expired and they are supposed to have their ID by this point, but the ID hasn't been released to them. So we've been trying to engage them and train them on how they can actually interact with the ministry so that they can get this kind of assistance, and also increase our interaction between these local administration offices and the relevant government offices.
But Irene, don't you think it's important for your organization to actually have some sort of basic sensors, and knowing when we have foreigners in this particular area that we are dealing, these are recognized as refugees and these are not, or these are in the process, so that you know who you're dealing with and how to support them? Because it sounds to me like you're treating all of them blanket as refugees. They may not all be refugees.
For illegal immigrants, one, they will not have then documentation to show. for refugees and asylum seekers, then they have documentation to show. And so when you go out there to the community, it will be difficult for you to determine the number of illegal immigrants that we have. And the reason actually it becomes difficult is because they're actually hiding away to be in the country. So it will be difficult for you to access them and ask them. But we know that we have persons who live within the neighborhoods who are not refugees. Some of them will be legal immigrants. Some of them will be
being hosted by a proper recognized refugee, for instance.
Yeah, some of them will be hosted by proper recognized refugees. Some of them will be hosted by Kenyans. And we still have another population of East Africans from Uganda, then living in Kenya just as East Africans. And so those that do not have refugee documentation, then it's not easy for us to distinguish whether CT is living in Kenya as an illegal immigrant or as an EAC citizen in this particular country. And so that's why, as Irene is saying, those that have refugee identification, it's easy for us to know because they have that. Okay. They would come out. But for the illegal immigrants, they may not be able to come out.
You know, there's a category of employee in this country, a domestic worker. Some, we're told, come from Tanzania, from Uganda. And they crisscross the borders, you know, just like I would get up, like I came in this morning for work and I go back. The others work, for instance, in cultural establishments near the border, bars, restaurants, hotels. Those are cultural establishments. Okay. And do these individuals qualify to be legal immigrants?
It depends. And it depends on this. Out of our East African Common Market Protocol and the East African treaties, different countries have agreed on various aspects. For instance, Kenya and Uganda agreed that you can walk to Uganda just with your ID. His Excellency the President, in one of the public national events, he stated that persons from the East African can come into the country and they can be able to work. And so it all depends on the relations between one country and the other, because even within the East African countries, it is not all the countries that have agreed on each and every particular aspect.
True.
So Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, they have some agreement. Kenya, Tanzania, they do not have some agreement in terms of this. And so there are those who would be legal, there are those that will not be legal migrants. But then, because you brought that up, it also reminds me that many times you'll find some of those persons coming to work within the countries actually and some underage girls who come from Pamoja because the situation is tough, and so they are brought within this. And so that goes to another realm of actual human trafficking, because it's an aspect of exploitation of persons. They come to these particular countries. Child labor is actually a form of human trafficking and exploitation. And I think government just needs to step up to ensure that we do not have then this happening, because then we deprive these particular children their rights and chance to go to school and all those particular aspects. Why? Because Kenya becomes the pull factor of bringing them and taking advantage of their poor backgrounds to come and have them as house helps within the country, even including persons who have disabled persons who you see on the streets who beg and they come from Tanzania.
Yeah.
I mean, again, a form of human trafficking that's happening.
So, Irene, if somebody then comes into the country, obviously seeking refugee status, what things are they entitled to? I mean, you come in, what things can you be guaranteed that coming into Kenya as host nation you will have, without a doubt?
Okay, so first and foremost, the moment you get into the country legally, you're supposed to go to any local any administrative government office and just state that your presence is there, and commit yourself to starting the application to get your proper documentation. And in the meantime, at the moment you get to the government offices, you'll be given a document that's supposed to show that you're in the waiting process or in the waiting period to get your documentation. And during this period, you are entitled to enjoy certain rights, as Jamin had highlighted, the right to accessing basic services, the right to education, the right to health facilities, every other rights you're entitled to just because of the mere fact that you've been recognized and your process of being identified is currently ongoing.
So, Jerry Maria is asking, what happens to refugees with different impairments, that's disabilities? Are they supported? Are they prioritized in protection and resettlement?
In terms of the support for people living with disability, children and women, UNHCR and other agencies, we have specific agencies, for instance, that will deal with persons living with disability in both the physiotherapy, counseling, and all those particular aspects. And so there's a recognition of affirmative action for these categories of people, because then they have different challenges from the rest of the persons. Whether they are prioritized for resettlement, it depends. And the reason is resettlement is about persons going to other countries. Those other particular countries then will determine who they are willing to actually receive. So they say, we are willing to receive youth, for instance, because they also have an end goal. Maybe they want people to contribute to their labor. And so it's on a case-by-case basis. Resettlement becomes a case-by-case basis, but then it's not a cluster of actually persons that then will be resettled over this, over that. The only other key priority that they will be given for resettlement is where then those particular persons, their life continue to be in danger even after they've come into the country. So those then will find their exit to other countries. But yes, organizations, UNHCR, then put measures to support persons living with disability, whether it's supporting them with mobility structures or even counseling and that kind of issues.
So just again, because every time we've heard, refugees, there's always and so there's a host nation, obviously then having reacted or accepted then the different elements that bodies like UNHCR then demands of countries, right? But then usually every time we hear about refugees, it's the interventions that are being made by organizations that are not necessarily government that we see happening. Yes, you must go to your local administration to get registered when you come into the country and things like this. But in terms of upkeep and livelihoods thereafter, then it becomes questionable about how much government participation that you see. Is this something that happens across the world, or do we find government taking a direct participation in what happens in the lives of refugees?
The responsibility of hosting refugees is responsibility of government. However, UNHCR and other partners come into the space to assist government on the same. There's a recognition that the burden of hosting refugees should not just be left on host countries. And so that's where these agencies then come in. The Department of Refugee Services issues documentations to refugees who come into the country to see that then they are recognized. And so they are then legally within the country. But then agencies have come out to support, and especially refugees that live within the camps, where they have come to build schools in those particular areas. WFP has come to provide food, institutions like IRC providing healthcare in those particular areas. And in some areas, like in the urban areas, organizations such as IRC Rebuild Program coming in to support self-reliance by taking them to school to acquire skills, giving them some small money to be able to begin businesses on their own. And so, yes, government has a role to play, but then institutions have come out to support governments in this, because then dealing with refugees is certainly not the responsibility of government alone, but then it's a global call for everybody to be able to support.
Jamin, thank you very much for joining us again today, and welcome back, Irene Kinoti. Next time, you'll not be a tear guest, so it'll not be the hottest seat for you.
Yes. So today's theme is whoever, wherever, whenever refugees have right to seek safety, and so that becomes our rallying call today and the days to come. That wherever they are, whenever they are, whoever they are, then they have a right to seek safety. Thank you.
Jamin Kusuania is a Rebuild Advocacy Manager at International Rescue Committee, and Irene Kinoti is a Program Officer at Pamoja Trust.